I have been writing for about 17 years, since 2008. And this one is a book of short stories.
Michael Harris sold more than 40 million children's books across the world, becoming one of the most beloved entertainers in Britain. Parents trusted him, children adored him, and for nearly 2 decades, his face was a constant on family television. He was seen as a man who brought joy wherever he went. The kind of figure who could make a nation smile with just a story. But in 2021, one leaked private recording changed everything. The conversation shocked audiences, ruined his reputation, and forced him to step away from the career he had built. What nobody realized at the time was that this was only the surface of Michael's real story. The cruel words caught on tape were not the darkest thing about him. Behind the stage lights, behind the laughter, there was a truth far more painful. It was a truth about secrets he had been carrying since childhood, about multiple suicide attempts, about family struggles, and about a sadness so deep that he would spend his entire life trying to survive it. Michael Harris's life wasn't just about fame. It was about endurance, about a boy who grew into a man still haunted by the same shadows. Michael Harris was born on September 4, 1973 in Birmingham, England. His parents, Peter and Ann, worked tirelessly just to make ends meet. His father was a city bus driver who earned around $7,500 a year. His mother was a part-time nurse at the local hospital, sometimes pulling night shifts for an extra $40 a week. They lived in a cramped 2-bedroom council flat on the edge of the city, its windows looking out at the depot where his father parked the buses. To an outsider, the Harris family was ordinary, working class, unremarkable, doing the best they could. But inside that small flat, Michael was different. From the age of 4, he would disappear into the cupboard under the stairs for hours at a time, practicing voices and imitating the characters he heard on the radio. His mother once recalled how'd find him in the kitchen, talking in 5 different accents, carrying on full conversations with imaginary people. What no one could see then was that these performances weren't just games. They were his escape. Even before he turned 7, Michael was already wrestling with anxiety, loneliness, and the first dark thoughts that would stay with him for the rest of his life. When Michael was 9 years old, he joined a local youth drama club. It should have been the perfect place for a boy who loved voices, costumes, and comedy. For a short while, it was. He lit up on stage, memorizing lines in a single night, delivering them with a natural flair that impressed the adults. But the other boys didn't see talent. They saw someone to mock. Within weeks, he was being ridiculed for sounding too posh and too dramatic. They nicknamed him actress and shoved him into lockers. One boy slapped him across the face during rehearsal and told him to act like I'm on. The bullying followed him home, and for the first time, Michael began to wonder if there was something wrong with him. The breaking point came during a winter school trip to Snowdonia. Michael was sharing a bunkhouse with older boys who teased him relentlessly. One evening, after hours of jeering, Michael was found dangling from a rope tied to the upper bunk. He had looped it around his neck. A teacher cut him down, and the official story given to his parents was that it had been an accident, a prank that had gone wrong. His mother never believed it. Years later, Michael himself would admit what really happened. He had tried to end his life. He was only 9 years old. The incident was buried quickly, but for Michael, it marked the beginning of a secret battle that would shape his entire life. He returned home quieter, more withdrawn, locking himself in his room for hours. He filled notebooks with jokes and sketches, trying desperately to drown out the darker thoughts. His parents didn't speak of what happened. They accepted the school's version of events, telling themselves it had been nothing more than a mistake. But Michael knew the truth. He didn't want to live anymore. He didn't know how to explain it, even to himself. All he knew was that the pain inside him was bigger than anything he could put into words. By age 10, Michael had developed an obsession with comedy. He would scour charity shops for records and tapes, spending his entire 2-weekly allowance on second-hand albums. He built a collection of more than 60 comedy records, memorizing every word of Monty Python sketches, Rowan Atkinson routines, and stand-up acts from comedians far older than him. He would stay up late into the night rehearsing full shows in front of the mirror, often dressed in his sister's old clothes, adding wigs and scarves to become someone else. His mother once woke at 2 o'clock in the morning to find him performing a full sketch in the living room, pretending an invisible audience was laughing with him. What noon outside the family knew was that Michael was already under medical care. At just 11 years old, doctors prescribed him a low-dose antidepressant, Imatine, a drug rarely given to children at the time. His parents were told it might help stabilize his moods. Michael began wearing headphones almost constantly, blasting music for hours just to silence the thoughts in his mind. He would lie on his bed, staring at the ceiling, convinced that nobody really understood him. His schoolwork began to suffer. Within 6 months, his grades collapsed, dropping from A's to odds. Teachers wrote in their reports that he was bright but distracted, a boy who seemed to live in another world. Michael himself later admitted that laughter became his lifeline. Every sketch, every funny voice, every moment he could make someone smile, it was all part of holding himself together. But the truth was, he was falling apart. He was still a child, but already he was carrying the kind of pain most adults never fully understand. When Michael entered secondary school, things quickly spiraled out of control. On his very first week, he was mocked in the lunch hall for the way he spoke. His accent wasn't rough enough. His mannerisms were too dramatic. His walk was different. Within days, he became the target of relentless bullying. The older boys saw his love for theater and comedy as weakness, and they attacked him for it. By the end of his first term, Michael had already been hospitalized twice. Once after a group of boys shoved him into a wall so hard it fractured his wrist, and another time after being locked in a dark supply closet for more than 6 hours. When a janitor finally found him, he was shaking, dehydrated, and covered in bruises. The bullying wasn't just physical. It was psychological. His classmates began calling him mime because he often performed silent sketches in drama class, and the nickname stuck like a scar. Wherever he went, he heard whispers, laughter, cruel voices telling him he didn't belong. His weight dropped rapidly. Over the course of a single year, he went from 9 stone down to 7. His face becoming hollow, his uniform hanging loose on his frame. Teachers noticed the changes, but no one intervened. His English teacher quietly kept notes about his condition, the fading bruises on his arms, the strange explanations he gave for his injuries. When asked about the black eye he carried into class one morning, Michael insisted he had fallen down the stairs. Nobody pushed further. At home, Michael tried to hide the truth from his parents. He told them he was fine, that school was going well, but at night he was crumbling. He filled pages of his journals with sketches, punchlines, and jokes, trying desperately to use comedy as a shield against the loneliness that consumed him. It was the only thing that seemed to keep him alive. By 13, he had memorized dozens of sketches and could perform entire one-man shows in front of his mirror. He would stay up late rehearsing routines, transforming into different characters, telling himself that if he could make people laugh, maybe they would stop seeing him as weak. Comedy became both his shield and his mask. But even in those moments of joy, he couldn't escape the darkness. Teachers noticed his grades slipping further. He went from being one of the brightest students in his class to barely passing assignments. At home, his parents argued over what to do. His father, a practical man, insisted he simply needed to toughen up. His mother, more sensitive, worried that her son was slipping into a place she couldn't reach. Michael, meanwhile, felt like he was living 2 lives. One where he smiled and performed, and another where he battled thoughts so heavy that he could barely breathe. The summer of 1987 brought another devastating blow. Michael had been convinced to attend a summer scout camp, a last attempt to help him fit in with other boys his age. At first, he tried. He went along with the games, the hikes, the nightly campfires, but the teasing returned almost instantly. The older boys mocked his voice, called him names, and during a fake swimming test, stripped him down and left him humiliated in front of everyone. That night, Michael went back to his tent, tied his school tie around his neck, and tried once again to end his life. This time, his mother found him. She had driven to the camp unexpectedly, worried after days of not hearing from him. When she walked into the tent, Michael was unconscious. The camp erupted in panic. The ambulance arrived just before 8 p.m. Doctors said he had been without oxygen for several minutes. For 3 days, he remained under strict watch. Doctors documenting that his condition was worsening. He was only 12, yet his medical notes read like those of an adult battling severe depression. After that, his parents finally pulled him out of the Scouts for good. But the damage was done. Michael was scarred physically by the bullying, emotionally by the humiliation, and mentally by the darkness that never seemed to leave. The doctors advised ongoing psychiatric care, but in the 1980s, mental health was rarely spoken about. His parents hoped things would get better with time. Michael knew otherwise. Deep down, understood that this wasn't something that would fade. It was something that would follow him for the rest of his life. Even so, he continued to hide behind comedy. He continued to perform sketches in front of the mirror, to memorize records, to drown himself in laughter. It wasn't because he wanted to be Asta. It was because laughter was the only thing keeping him alive. By the time Michael turned 14, his parents hoped he might finally find a place where he belonged. That year, he was accepted into a prestigious youth theatre program in London, the same institution that had launched the careers of some of Britain's most celebrated actors. For a boy who had memorized comedy albums and spent years performing alone in his bedroom, it should have been a dream come true. But in reality, it was yet another reminder of how deeply out of place he felt. Surrounded by other teenagers who loved acting, Michael should have felt at home. Instead, he felt more isolated than ever. The other students formed quick friendships, laughing together between rehearsals, meeting up after class. Michael lingered in the edges, smiling when spoken to, but always retreating back into himself. Years later, he admitted that it felt like everyone else had a group. Everyone except him. Even in a room full of kids who shared his passion, he was still the outsider. It was during these years that he first crossed paths with another young performer who would later become one of his closest collaborators. Their friendship began as a simple partnership. Two awkward teenagers making each other laugh, but even then, Michael's sadness never fully lifted. He described it later as wearing a mask. On the outside, he played the role of the funny friend, the one who could make everyone laugh. On the inside, he was falling apart. At school, his academic life continued to unravel. He had once been a top student, praised for his sharp memory and wit. But by 16, his report cards were filled with notes about distraction, lack of focus, and sudden mood swings. His teachers recognized his talent in drama. But in every other subject, he was slipping further behind. The only place he excelled was on stage. In one memorabilism, he scored 98% for a one-man performance piece about loneliness. Ironically, it was the truest expression of his life at the time. As he edged closer to adulthood, Michael began to understand that he couldn't keep living in two worlds. He was the boy mocked, bullied, and broken in private. But he was also beginning to shape the identity of a performer. He needed something that would separate those two lives. That moment came at 17 when he applied to join the Actors' Equity Union. He discovered to his frustration that another performer had already registered under the name Michael Harris. If he wanted to act professionally, he would have to choose a new name. For most people, it might have been a minor inconvenience. For Michael, it became a turning point. Sitting at the kitchen table with a phone book in front of him, he ran his finger down a list of surnames and stopped on one at random. That was it. He would no longer be Michael Harris. He will be someone else entirely. His father was furious. He saw it as an insult to the family, as if Michael were rejecting their name and everything it represented. He confronted him, telling him that Harris was their bloodline, their history, and that throwing it away was a betrayal. But for Michael, it was never about fame or professionalism. It was about escape. It was about leaving behind the boy who had been mocked, who had tried to end his life more than once, who never felt good enough. Choosing a new name was like choosing a new skin. It was the chance to stop being himself, if only for a little while. But a new name didn't solve his old battles. As he stepped into adulthood, the shadows inside him grew darker. By 1989, Michael was accepted to study drama at the University of Manchester. For the first time, he was living away from home, surrounded by other aspiring actors and artists. It should have been liberating, and in some ways, it was. He threw himself into performances, winning praise from his lecturers, making audiences laugh in student productions. Yet behind the curtain,